What do you guys think of the whole Bitcoin ETF passing?
Well, it's definitely a watershed moment. I think eventually people will realize that not only does it allow retail to buy, which is very powerful, but it will also allow institutions to short it, which is also like a counterbalance. So it's going to bring a whole new world to Bitcoin. And I suspect it actually may wind up smoothing out the volatility. But hey, more on that later on in the stream. Forrest, why don't we just talk about the chart? Why don't we have like a conversation about what's going on with Bitcoin and what do we think it means?
Yeah. So I'm sharing my screen here, guys. Can you see this? Let me know when you can.
Okay, I got you.
Yeah. So I've got two Bitcoin charts I like to keep. One is a little bit busier and more complicated than the other, and it's a little bit tougher to see these key levels. So what I've done is I've created this simplified version that we've been using, and the simplified version just captures all of the same support and resistance, just in a more simplified and easier to view way. So first of all, there's a couple things about this chart that I want to draw people's attention to, and one is this big support / resistance line that I'm just going to turn orange / yellow, so that everybody knows which one I'm talking about, because this trend line dates back all the way to September of 2017, over 4 years ago, and it's still relevant to this day, right? It was our resistance. It was the peak point in early September of 2017, before we had a nasty crash and before we ended up breaking through it, making support and going all the way up to 20K. And this was our support level and then our subsequent resistance levels all throughout the bear market, right? So pretty much the entire bear market was spent below this trend line. And thus far, the majority of the bull market, right, after in 2021, after the year changeover, has actually been spent above this trend line, above this orange trend line. We only spent a small period of time below this trend line. If I can measure it, whoops.
So the orange trend line was the key in developing this like bullish zone that really let you have the call on this, right? Because the orange line is what it bounced off to start this move.
Exactly. And this is where we saw this extremely strong bounce. And we saw that bounce there for two reasons. This was the apex or the convergence of these two really, really important trend lines, right? So we have this one that dates back to 2017, which we held, right? We broke through and held as support when we corrected from 42K all the way down to 29,000, and then subsequently moved up to our all-time high at just under 65K. And then when everything crashed, right, and everybody got liquidated here, and Bitcoin overcorrected in the short term, where did it start bouncing? It started finding support on this trend line. Now it was messy, right, because everybody was panicking. And if you look at these wicks, I mean, look at all of these wicks down below 30K, right? Most of the support was on this trend line. The wicks just indicate how emotional of a market that it was, right? And we did have a very scary time. This was actually a very precarious situation, a very scary time where we actually broke below this trend line, found resistance and started heading lower. But ultimately the bulls swooped back in and we pushed Bitcoin back up above 30K, right? 30K was a really, really big zone. Now, once we got above 30K, we found support yet again, right? We broke through this trend line. We found support on it yet again. So this trend line just continues to be validated in this bull market, right? And it's a 4-year-old trend line. So we had this 4-year-old trend line off of this most recent dip hold up. But then we also found support, and I'm going to change the color of this one so that you can see it a little bit better. Let's just make it blue. Right? You can see this downtrend line, and we talked about this downtrend line on Token Metrics TV and the Token Metrics live stream literally for months. literally from the time we spilled off, we talked about we had our all-time high, then we had our lower high, and then we had our spill off. And we talked about how that we needed to come back up and test this trend line, and how by breaking through this trend line and finding support on top of it, that's what Bitcoin ultimately needed to do in order to go back into a bull market. Now, we've had our big move here, right? We've had our big move back up to the top of this range, but that's just what it is. It's a zone, it's a range, right? Bitcoin looks extremely strong to me for obvious reasons, right? Bitcoin's strong because we just saw a ridiculously strong move out of it, right? That's a 59% move out of Bitcoin. So you're probably thinking, duh, Forrest, of course it looks strong. It just moved 60% upwards and is knocking on the door of its all-time high. But one of the other reasons it's looking pretty strong to me is that if I switch this chart, right, you're going to see this bundle of margin pressure levels here. And if you don't understand margin pressure levels, we go over it on Token Metrics TV and Crypto Foresights. I've got videos, so definitely go check out Token Metrics TV if you want to understand margin pressure levels and margin pressure level theory at a deeper level. But what you really need to understand is that these levels are the point at which you can no longer buy Bitcoin on 2x leverage and hide your liquidation point below this last big local low, this big, huge consolidation and correction. And what we're seeing, if we'll zoom in, we're seeing Bitcoin's holding above these margin pressure levels. That means right now the market is telling us that they do not believe that it is going back below 30K in the short term. Right? The market's saying, we don't believe Bitcoin's at risk of going below 30K in the short term. And that's why we're comfortable spot buying. And that's why we're comfortable buying on leverage up here above these levels. Now, if we start dropping below these levels, back below 60K, I'll switch back to my other chart here. That's when things get a little bit nerve-wracking, but I'm not really nervous here. They get nerve-wracking in terms of us seeing a pullback, right? But even if we see a pullback, I'm really not nervous at all until we break this trend line, right? We've held this trend line, and that's why I think it's so important right now to be hedged or to hedge in some way. Now, you can hedge in so many different ways. You can buy a put option. You can take out a small leverage short, or you can just pay yourself, take some profits, right? Move. If you're all in on crypto right now, you could consider, not financial advice, taking 5, 10, 15% into stable coins just to have some cash on hand in case we see what would be a completely normal pullback, maybe down to this support level, maybe down to this support level, maybe down to some margin pressure levels that we have in this region, or maybe if we get a really nasty pullback all the way down to this trend line. Again, if we see Bitcoin pull back to this trend line, it's not that bearish. It's really not. You know, it would be a very nasty pullback because it would be a 28% correction for Bitcoin. But remember, 27 to 30% corrections for Bitcoin in a bull market is nothing new. That happens all the time. In fact, 30% corrections have happened in the past, right before Bitcoin blasts off and makes new all-time highs and moves up parabolically, right? So we could move all the way back down to 46K without being, having to be afraid of a bear market. However, I will say this correction seems less likely until we start breaking below 60K because we're still holding above those margin pressure levels. However, I mean, we're in this resistance zone. There's lots of resistance here that we've got to get through. So this is kind of an all-out war right here between the bulls who want to be all in on crypto and ride Bitcoin up to 75, 80K, and the bears who are saying, you know what, I want to take some profits. I caught this move from 40,000 up to 60,000. I'm going to take some off the table, and I'm not so sure that Bitcoin's going to make an all-time high. So that's kind of the situation Bitcoin is in right now. Just a classic choppy battle right here between the bulls and the bears to decide whether or not we're going into a new all-time high and see the continuation of this bull market, or potentially see a little pullback off of this big move. Pullback wouldn't be that unhealthy for Bitcoin.
Token Metrics is a cryptocurrency investment platform that helps users leverage machine learning to become better crypto investors. Our in-depth analysis helps eliminate the emotions of investing, find profitable investment opportunities, and filters out scams. Learn more at tokenmetrics.com.